Michelle, but we have Justine filling in. So thank you. We've had Justine a few times, so love having her back. Thank you so much. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Manhattan Psychology Group. I'm not going to take up too much of your time, but I just want to share with you who we are. MPG was established in 2011. We are a multidisciplinary team of adult and child psychologists, neuropsychologists, BCBAs, special educators, and a lot of us work together for our clients. So there's quite a big team, and that is what makes us a multidisciplinary team. So it's a little bit unique. We have wraparound care with psychological services, testing, ABA skills assessments, behavioral and educational services. We also provide CBT, which, in addition to ABA, MPG provides CBT, PCIT, space, social skills groups, neuropsych testing, ABA services. We conduct FBAs and BIPs for certain clients that just need those services. Also tutoring, one-on-one support. We have parent training groups, HRT and school refusal, specific clients that are here just for school refusal concerns, family therapy, also selective mutism. We have a selective mutism clinic and in-home therapy. So a lot of things happening with FBG. We do virtual and in-person services. And our mission is really to provide multidisciplinary integrated support for individuals and their families who experience psychological, developmental, and educational challenges. So we're here for all of it. And our vision is just to create a future where individuals and their families feel supported, connected, and empowered. And Justine, let me introduce her for those of you who don't know her already. She is one of our providers and a clinical supervisor here at MPG. She has over a decade of professional experience with children with autism and other developmental disabilities. She's developed and implemented behavior analytic programming across 3 states, and she works on increasing language, social, and play skills. She's also pretty specialized in feeding therapy. I didn't include that there. And she's implemented functional behavior assessments to build function-based interventions. And so she's going to talk a little bit about these areas and common errors that BCBs make. So I want to hear from you guys too. I'm going to put out some polls. The polls today are anonymous, so feel free to answer honestly. This is really just so everybody can see, that these mistakes maybe are so common and that we are learning and growing constantly. And that's what makes our field that's what makes our field a science, because we're always learning and questioning, right? And we have philosophical doubt. So 6 common mistakes that BCBAs make and some alternatives. Thank you, Justine.
Thank you, Kristen. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's an honor that you all chose to be with us on this evening, the week between some holidays. So hope everyone's cozy. Let's spend the next 45, 50 minutes or so chatting about 6 common mistakes that BCBAs make, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. Like Kristen said, I was not originally planning on giving this presentation, so bear with me if I look at my notes a little bit more than usual. Okay, so tonight we will go through all of these following objectives. Let me just move this a little bit so I can see what's on the screen. There we go. Identify mistakes common to the practice of behavior analysis. Identify some alternatives to some forced compliance that might be used, escape extinction. Identify some alternative methods to targeting stereotypy, and identify ways to bridge parent goals with BCBA goals and how to marry those two. So first, let's talk through this focus on compliance. And this really comes up as we, as BCBAs, should be leaning in a little bit more to compassionate care. And this focus on compliance in our field really is changing. So what is a focus on compliance, right? It's the expectation to follow a direction, spoken or unspoken, of a person or a situation. And with that comes compliance training. Compliance training, any practice of teaching a student or a client that if something is asked of them, they must comply. So what are some questions that we should ask ourselves related to focusing on compliance? Have we physically required a child to respond? Have we withheld positive stimuli until a child has responded? Have we punished non-responding in some way? Is escape extinction being used across the day, maybe in the classroom or maybe being used in a separate room? Why do we focus on compliance? Why is this something that comes up for us in our field? And really at baseline, like let's just think about the basics and the initial start of working with clients or students in the classroom. Oftentimes parents or teachers or anyone that we talk to in interviews will say, well, this child or this person is not following directions. They won't do anything that I ask them to do. So sometimes our mind might go right to, well, we have to work on compliance. We have to get them to follow those directions. What are you asking them to do? Well, they should be doing that, right? And from a behavior analyst perspective, we might focus on compliance in our sessions. Maybe we think it would increase the rate of acquisition. Maybe it would make the session run smoother. It would create a better behaved client across all environments. Respect might come into play depending on maybe the level of subjectivity that a BCBA might bring to the table. It may create a calmer client, a safer environment eventually, less disruption. And maybe it's a level of comfort. Maybe this is a strategy that has been used historically in this BCBA's experience, so they feel comfortable implementing this procedure. But why might a focus on this be an error? So we have a poll up here. Just a question: have you ever used compliance training? I know I have. I have used compliance training. Have I seen it be effective? Sure, I have. But it can be an error in many situations. And as everyone's filling out that poll, I'm going to start chatting through why. So sometimes escape extinction or compliance training can lead to a use of physical prompting. And if that becomes the go-to for certain therapists, it can lead to abuse. Not saying it does, it can. And abuse is much more common among the disabled population, likely because this population has difficulty advocating for themselves. It can be an error because it might not be socially appropriate or valid for the clients that we're working with. We should be thinking about, as we set our clients out into the world outside of our session, do we want them to comply with all directives? Is that the takeaway that we're looking to gain? Probably not, right? First, from a safety perspective. Do all neurotypical adults comply with all directives? No. So, the social validity piece comes into play. It can decrease independent functioning, decrease autonomy, can be misaligned with the BACB ethical code. And some of those are outlined here. And then just asking ourselves, if all else fails, right? We should be asking ourselves, who is this benefiting? Is it the client? Is it the parent? Is it benefiting other kids in the class? Here are some alternatives. All right, I'm going to end the poll. Okay. And results are being shared. So 73% of participants have used compliance training, 15% no, and 11% unsure. So because there is a small percentage of people who are unsure if they've ever used compliance training, I think the most straightforward explanation would be escape extinction, which means the same demand is presented over time until that demand is complied with. So Typically, to teach compliance with a demand, we will use a instruction that can be prompted. So we might not use an expressive language demand where we're saying like, what is this? Because we can provide a verbal model as a prompt, but that doesn't ensure that that is the response that's going to be given. There's room for error. So oftentimes with escape extinction, we will shift to a demand that can be physically prompted. So maybe hand over hand, point to, and we'll use manual guidance until we can fade that manual guidance and that instruction is complied with independently. And then once it's independent, we move on to the next instruction and just practice compliance in this way. That's one example of, I'm sure many, but seems like the most straightforward one to use here. So some alternatives to compliance training. Focus on cooperation. I'm just going to turn my page. Focus on teaching to skill acquisition, right? What skills can we teach to increase engagement with communication, engagement with materials in meaningful ways, teach through different play interactions to create positive interactions, work on reciprocal engagement, this cooperation piece where there's two dancing when it comes to completion of things. Focus on functional communication. The piece about functional communication that's really important is allowing access. Once functional communication has been provided, the client engages in that response that's been provided. We have to make sure that we reinforce by giving access. So we can teach escape requests, teach access requests, and then that piece about honoring is really important. We can fix the environment. We should be looking at the environment and asking ourselves, what here is causing this, this lack of assent to what we are asking in the given moment. And we should be asking ourselves, can I offer choice here within boundaries that are more appropriate to the larger goal in mind for this client? So when is compliance absolutely necessary? I always think about situations where we would want 100% accuracy in demonstration of a skill to be present, right? Because when we're thinking about mastery criteria for something like a math skill or reading, we're likely picking 85%. There's room for error, right? Because it's not a life or death situation. Maybe some self-care skills, we're looking for 100% accuracy to reach the final end goal, but really compliance is absolutely necessary when it comes to safety skills. Walking next to someone when crossing a busy street, staying away from hot things, sharp things, wearing a seatbelt so that they are a safer participant in the vehicle that they're traveling in. We can teach those skills using shaping procedures, so reinforcing approximations whenever possible. The goal is to frequently allow the student or client to access positive interactions surrounding potentially very negative and aversive situations. But across all teaching opportunities, if the client is showing that there is something wrong, verbal refusal, saying no, crying, think about discontinuing and see how we can work around that situation in a more positive way. Okay, assumption. I know at some point in my professional career, I am guilty of making the following assumptions. So assuming internal state or status, that can mean assuming what's motivating based on past motivation, assuming that a goal is appropriate, and assuming that parents want something to be done, assuming that a therapist or a parent, the people that we train, assuming that they have a level of understanding just because we've experienced something, right? These are the type of assumptions that are frequently made. So motivation, an example of that would be handing a student an iPad as they're actively reaching for a toy truck, right? This happens a lot where, oh, they like the iPad. No, you don't want the truck, you want this. But in the moment, they're showing you they want something else, right? Don't assume what they want. Check for that. Offer choice. Or if this happens sometimes, show a choice board with pictures. Client will reach for an iPad and then you say, yeah, you got an iPad, go get it. And then they get the truck, right? What do we take as to be true, right? The 3D object or the 2D object? Pause, check for understanding. Say, oh, you got the truck. Here, come back, bring it over here. Try again. Show me what you want. There might need to be some teaching there, but we shouldn't assume in situations like that. Assuming goal appropriateness. Student needs to work on XYZ response when they do not encounter this in their everyday life, right? Let's say you're working on labeling picture cards or labeling actions with a student who lives in New York City. Early learner, is the first thing you're going to teach them to label a picture of a jet ski? Probably not, just because it's in that stack of weird picture cards that everyone uses, right? Like, think about the appropriateness of what you're teaching. Assuming parent desires. So it's important to the student it's important to the parent that the student stops engaging in hand flapping. Is it disruptive? Is it something they see as, stigmatizing for their child? We shouldn't assume. Assuming therapist understanding. Oh, I've modeled how to prompt the man, so they're definitely going to do it in like every situation appropriate. Run treatment integrity, right? Assuming parent understanding. This happens a lot with parents, probably because, being a parent, I have to assume like at some point you want to escape the interaction of someone telling you what to do with your own child, right? So you might just like, yes, someone like, yep, got it, yep. Thumbs up, let's move on. Check for understanding. We'll talk through that a little bit. We have another poll here. The question is, have you worked in a setting that runs routine treatment integrity, whether it be with the therapists or with parents? Let's see what we've got. Oh, numbers are showing high for treatment integrity. That's exciting. Treatment integrity is great. So many questions are answered. Oh, I thought we were supposed to do it this way, or I took that written rec for this. Oh, we're all running treatment integrity. This is actually how we all should be doing it. So we know consistency is so important in increasing skill acquisition. So we have 58% of people have worked in settings that run routine treatment integrity. 34% no, 8% unsure. Okay, I'll share results. Okay. I'll just close this. Okay, so an alternative, something that can help you with not assuming motivation. Run a preference assessment, right? And when running a preference assessment, be sure to pay attention to the hierarchy, right? And then test, are these activities, items, people, or interactions, I should say, functioning as a reinforcer? Or are they just preferred, right? Are they changing the future likelihood of the behavior we're trying to increase? Pay attention to that, right? And use these preferences differently. Maybe some, if they're just preferred, but not increasing rate of acquisition, filter them into the day, right? What truly is reinforcing? And maybe it's iPad all day long, doesn't matter. Maybe it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's increasing the rate of acquisition, right? That's going to be individualized, but these are questions we should be asking ourselves. Alternative to assuming goal appropriateness and parent desires. Make sure to talk to parents, right? Get input, review the goals, have frequent check-ins. Maybe that's quarterly, maybe that's annually. Check in. Hey, at our last meeting, you mentioned that this is like top priority for you. Is this still a top priority? Be vigilant with this, especially about the broad scale goals. If we notice something in a session that we may see as being interfering with learning or completion of a task, whatever it may be, check in with the parents. Hey, I noticed this. Do you notice that too? Is that something that you're looking to work on? Make it be a part of your conversation. Okay, so What you can do to avoid assuming therapist and parent understanding. Run treatment integrity, right? Model the skills. Allow for independent demonstration of whatever it is you are trying to teach. Check for understanding. Practice these things together. It's important to remember that just because you're successful in implementing something and the client is successful in demonstrating the skills with you may not be possible for everyone. So as we're selecting procedures to use with therapists, with clients, and with parents, with their child, think about, are they showing that they're able to be effective in using this in the same way it's intended to be used? If not, we might think about changing it. Okay, number 3, the third potential practical error, right? Practical because these things happen. Assigning cultural values. Your culture is my culture and vice versa. So what is culture, right? Customs of a collective group. So we should just take a moment now and then when we're working with clients to consider elements of your culture that you work on most frequently. Table manners. If you eat at home and then you work with a client on their eating, whether it be in school or in the community or at home, you might be working on table manners, pronunciation, linguistic structure. So like maybe certain slangs are used, or I'm from the Philadelphia area and like use is a word that is used saying like, instead of all of you, people from that region sometimes say the word use, all of yous. Should we fix that? Maybe, but maybe not if it's not a part of the client's culture to fix it, right? Appropriate activities, like what we might deem as like appropriate, generational appropriate activities, tidiness, daily living skills, language, what else, right? Think about what else are you working on with clients that are elements of your culture as well. So some alternatives to assuming culture, because culture is widely variable. What is important from one to another is incredibly different, can be incredibly different. It's easy to assign your own values. So acknowledge that often practitioners are not within the same culture as the people they're working with, and bias can be present. You can always do your own research, the norms of a student's culture, but just because you research something doesn't mean it necessarily is true for the lives of the client's culture. Observing and then asking questions if something is unclear or uncertain. Think about accepting the way that you do things is not the only way to do things. I'll never forget, years ago, I was working with a client and their family in the home on cooking skills. And I was looking for, because I use a measuring cup, like a big measuring cup with all the numbers. And I was looking for a measuring cup and my eyes completely skipped over that they had measuring cups, but they were like the separate kind. That's all the different cups. And I jotted down without asking questions. I was like, tell this parent to buy a measuring cup because that's what I use in my home to measure things. Instead, and now I have a little bit more knowledge and experience with things like this, I should have written down a note that said, what is used at home to measure ingredients when cooking? You know, that should have been my question. The way I found out that that was an error was I ended up saying, hey, can you buy a measuring cup? And they're like, oh, we have these things. Like, is this okay to use? Like, of course it is, because that's what you use in your home, right? That's just the first example that comes to my mind. If you are working on a team, promote cultural competency within your team. Check biases frequently. I think there's some different tests available online to help you and your team check yourself in the workplace. Might be a good idea if you're working on a team to look up what some of those resources may be. Include the family and goal setting and conversation surrounding culture. Teach culture to the student's culture. Okay, this is our first code for the CE. So code 1 is cultural. Cultural, and spelling, just in case you need it, is on the screen. Second. Okay. So the fourth practical error, there's only one way to do things. And this is similar to the section that we just reviewed, but error 4, in this way, we want you to think about the neurotypical way is the only way. So think about what neurotypical means, but then think about what neurodivergent means. Opposite, right? Two different ways of thinking, right? It's kind of like ability versus disability. You should be focusing on, what are the abilities of the person that you are working with, because the neurotypical way is not the only way to do things. So when looking at a set of characteristics that we often consider when talking about neurodivergence, more specifically, those on the autism spectrum, here are common targets that are prevalent in many ABA programs, focusing on reducing stereotypy, sincere focus on spoken word. And I think what that means related to like this focus on spoken word, that like what I think, this is my assumption of the person who created these slides, that the sincere focus on spoken word, meaning like that specific words matter, maybe around manners. So like saying please. So maybe when making a request, building in the spoken word, please. That's just where my mind goes. Everybody can interpret that for themselves. Focus on eye contact, focus on compliance, appropriate play skills, gender, age specific toys and activities, reduction of inappropriate play, sitting still. And then what else? The list goes on and on. This is not to say that these things listed here are not important, right? It's going to be individualized, but making eye contact may be important for certain people, but it might not be important for others, right? When we think about an operational definition of the behavior attending, right? Attending looks different for everyone. For some, eye contact is important, and maybe they've demonstrated that over time because maybe they're not able to provide an answer, whatever the answer may be, without eye contact first. Maybe that's a piece of them receiving the information that's needed to provide an answer. For others, just remaining in their seat is part of attending, orienting their body towards the speaker or the materials. Attending looks different for everyone. So just keep in mind that these behaviors may be appropriate for some, but not others. We should be asking ourselves, are they impacting the student or the client's quality of life, their ability to learn? Indices of happiness, is that being affected? Does the student want to change this behavior? We should ask ourselves, why here? So reduction of stereotypy. Do we always target? Do we sometimes target? Do we never target? This is kind of a repeat of the previous slide. So some considerations. Create goals surrounding what the student demonstrates an interest in, right? You can program for skills related to interests. You're going to see an increase in buy-in. You're going to maybe see interests peak in other areas that you didn't think, because you are programming more in one area and maybe getting exposure to some other things. Include the family and the student in goal planning, if appropriate for that client. Consider the long-term ramifications of not working on something. So like flip it a little bit. Is this to make the student more comfortable or to make the people who interact with them more comfortable? And that's a real question to ask yourself, specifically surrounding stereotypy. I worked with Dr. Peter Gerhardt years ago at a school in New York. And I don't know if people have heard him speak before at ABAI or know him, but he always talked about how there have been workplaces polled across the country about sensitivity to certain things or certain behaviors that coworkers engage in that are really off-putting. It was like a social validity test or a survey that was given, like in some research study that was done. And the top behavior that irks people the most, or they find, it's the behavior where they would say, like, I'm not sitting next to that person, is cleanliness during eating. That a majority of people in America said that that is like the one thing. Interesting to think about now post-COVID, right? Because for so long people didn't eat near each other in the workplace. But that's one of those things that can really impact other people feeling comfortable, but that then limits the maybe interactions that the client you're working with can have if it's something you choose not to work on. So things like that are important to think about. Not only might it be important for the client to work on this skill because it's important in the home, but maybe this person's going out in the workplace, and what will that mean there? So just an example of considerations in this practical error area. And then masking, camouflaging autistic traits. Just be careful with that. So again, consider, does this need to be targeted? If yes, maybe we teach signaled availability. There have been studies done around teaching stereotypy as a reinforcer for the absence of stereotypy for clients who that is an important behavior to reduce during certain times of the day. If yes, maybe we're teaching functional communication. If yes or no, provide caregiver education. If yes or no, provide access to both neurotypical and neurodivergent peers. Accept and embrace autistic traits. Maybe yes or no. When all else fails, just consider your reason and your rationale for why you're working on what you're working on. Okay, programming to assessment. This is our fifth area. Okay, I'm just doing a quick time check. Okay, so let's say you've conducted an assessment. Insurance requires it, work requires it, parents like it because it compares their child against themselves across time. It's a nice visual. You've done it. Now what? You select goals based on the data that this assessment has provided. You see student is missing XYZ skills in this particular domain. Do you pull your goals from this? Do you just fill in the boxes and move on? You're like, okay, here I'm copying right from VBMAP, this objective to section, domain, whatever. Sometimes, but more frequently, you don't. And it's important to just remain vigilant in understanding developmental milestones. And look into developmental milestones for your students or clients' age group if needed. Select goals that will have the greatest impact long-term, right? Should we be teaching discrimination skills if a client doesn't yet demonstrate matching skills? Maybe, but if they're not successful in any discrimination skills, you're likely going to have to first teach the matching skills. So order, right? Think about order in what you're teaching from the data that you get from these assessments. Think about behavioral cusps, right? What behaviors can we teach that are going to be a platform and open up other skills being learned? What are some really big goals? Requesting, right? That's like top thing that we should be teaching. That is a behavioral cusp, because then advocacy skills come later on, right? Tolerating. What other skills that you go to without pulling directly from your assessment? Just something to think about. I always say if I'm supervising a case where just based on observations or what parents have shared, a client is unable to respond to their own name in any situation, but there's like some level of receptive ID or visual discrimination targets, I like freak out because I'm like, just because the assessment said they don't have these skills, we have to be working on this like very important safety skill of responding to a name, whatever responding for that client looks like, right? Just an example. Think about what you're prioritizing based on the assessment. Select goals that the student demonstrates preferences for. And then make sure to observe school, community, home, and select goals for those settings as well that will be relevant. Again, just make sure they make sense for who you're working with. Okay, so the sixth practical error, prompting. Ineffective or inefficient prompts. And what's the difference between an ineffective prompt versus an inefficient prompt? So ineffective prompting, is the student learning at all, right? Is there any level of independence coming from these prompts that have been used? Physical prompting is a tricky one because for some, physical prompting is not an effective prompt because oftentimes clients will just stop responding once they feel someone doing it for them. So zoning in is important. Assent, being present when it comes to certain prompts. Question we should ask ourselves, will we be able to successfully fade this prompt? Verbal prompts, we know, are the hardest and least likely to be faded. Then asking, well, maybe it's not a prompt. Is the prompt there for life? Is it just a part of the response? In efficient prompting, is it the most efficient way to teach this skill? Is the student learning quickly? How long has this target been in place with this prompt present? Are you moving through prompts? Are they being faded over time? So these are common errors that are made. So some alternatives. Get creative with your prompting. Assess if this is truly a skill that the client needs physical prompting to complete. Again, just a reminder, do not physically prompt as a compliance strategy. Think about that. Determine if it's a physical skill deficit or a motivation issue. Maybe the skill needs to be broken down into easier tasks, scale back. Maybe shaping needs to be used. Maybe there are prerequisite skills that need to be used. So really analyze errors and then think about what prompts should be used or how can we teach this skill more effectively in other ways. If physical prompts are necessary, be sure that the student is attending whatever attending needs for them and is a willing participant in the activity. They are assenting. So for prompt fading, an error that's often made the same prompt level for multiple days, weeks, months, and or there's a high variability in the demonstration of that skill. Again, look at motivation, consider the skill itself. Maybe we fade to something easier at first. Maybe something's been contaminated. Boredom is happening at this point. Consider moving to something completely new, scaling back difficulty. Plan for prompt fading the moment a skill is introduced. Think about your plan, right? If this is a client or student you've been working with for a while, think about what prompts have been effective. So what should my order be? What is my mastery criterion? Stick to it. Think about how many trials are being run. Maybe there's a prompt sequence that's being used so it's faded across trials within a session. Make sure don't stay in a single prompt for more than 1 to 3 sessions. Again, it depends on how much you're with a client and what their rate of acquisition looks like, but think about that as a guide. If after 1 to 3 sessions, a skill has not progressed in any way, analyze those errors. Skill issue, motivation issue, or is there a learning history here? And then we have a bonus error. It's scientific, so it's right. ABA way is the only right way. Keep in mind the value that other perspectives from those who work with our clients can offer. Parent perspectives. Maybe a parent says, they're just not enjoying ABA sessions. That's a valuable statement. We need a little bit more information, right? If that's what is being said to us. So it should be treated as valuable information. What do we do with valuable information? We ask follow-up questions, right? Even if happiness is not measurable according to your master's program, right? It holds value. So ask questions. What aspect do you think they're not enjoying? What have you seen? Keep in mind perspectives of the autistic community. There's lots of blogs and different articles out there. And then other practitioners, OT, speech, special ed teachers, a psychologist. Different backgrounds have different ideas, and we should be encouraged to consult with different types of providers and allow your perspective to be challenged and, if needed, changed. Okay, code number 2 for the CE is prompting. Pausing for code 2 for those who are getting a CE, prompting. And the spelling, if you need it, is on the screen. Okay. So in closing, just some food for thought on the heels of that, ABA is the only way, that error in thinking. Be humble, be open to learning, be ready to make changes and modify in the interest of keeping humanity and compassion in your practice. There's no black and white. There's a lot of different ways to do things. There's no end all, right and wrong. Behavior is complex. There's multiple players and lots of variables affecting the work that we do. And the ultimate error is treating it as if behavior is not complex. So think about that. And so if you have any questions, there's contact information and there's a post-webinar quiz, but I know we have some time. So Kristen, I don't know if you want to do some questions.
Yeah, we have quite a few questions, which is exciting.
Okay.
All right, let's go to the first one.
How would you? Go ahead. I just hadn't opened any of these.
How would you explain to a parent that the neurotypical way is not always the right or best way?
That's a really good question. I think if a parent, I guess it depends on how it's presented, right? So like, we could give a textbook response to that answer, or we could say, how does that come out with a parent? They might say, let's say they have a game night and they're so frustrated that their child isn't playing Uno the way everyone plays Uno. Everyone plays Uno, right? And so they might say, like, I want them to be able to do this thing. And I would say, well, how do you want that to be done? And like, ask questions. And they might say, like, well, when they see this, I want them to just do the thing that like their sister does. And I want them to just play Uno the way they play Uno. And then I would just go into a conversation about, there's lots of different ways to play games. There are the rules, right, that Uno says that you play, but it's difficult. It may be difficult for your son to know what all of these cards mean. So to play more successfully, they might need a key on the side with them. I don't know. I think that can go a lot of different ways, but instead of focusing on the true definition of like neurotypical, when having conversations with parents, I would say, well, how do you think it should be done? Now let's talk about what's practical for your child. Does it matter, right? Go into more conversation about like what they're actually asking or what they're actually concerned about, rather than focusing on like the term neurotypical or anything like that. That's probably in practice what I would say.
Thank you. Thanks, Justine. And I think there's just so many aspects to this question. I get this question a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about this question a lot when I'm working with parents and parents want their child, for example, to stop engaging in vocal stereotypy. That's like probably what most of us have heard, and we need to know more about why the parent's so concerned with this and in what settings the parent is concerned with this, because it's not just all stereotypy needs to be extinct. That's what we need to move away from, and that's why we have to ask questions and understand the parents' concerns so that we can better address their concerns. I don't know if Justine, you have any other questions about that?
No, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. There's another one. Someone's asking, maybe sincere focus on spoken words means considering using other forms of communication.
Maybe.
Okay. I think you were like, I think I remember that part.
Yeah. I was like, this is how I'm interpreting.
Yeah. Good thought. Thank you, Andrea.
Yeah.
Jessica said, I love this so much. How do you summarize progress in a treatment plan to justify mastery based on client needs and abilities rather than mastery because it looks neurotypical? And what wording might you use?
Mastery based on client needs. I'm trying to make sure I understand this. How do you summarize?
Yeah, I know. I was trying to reread it.
Treatment plan to justify mastery based on the client's needs and abilities rather than mastery because it looks neurotypical. Huh.
I think I understand this question. To me, I would just present the progress and not put an interpretation on the progress. I would just report if it was met, if it's in progress.
Agreed.
And I wouldn't like make a discussion about it in a report. I mean, like with my opinion.
Yeah. And I also would make sure to always bring it back to, I'm not sure what others are doing. It depends, because if you have done an assessment, always bring it back to, well, when we started this, here's what she or they were demonstrating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And bring it back to like how this is progress for them rather than progress as compared to a group.
Yeah, I would also say maybe also take data in the natural environment and just do some observations and either take data using partial interval recording or whole interval recording during like 15 minutes or 5-minute observations. To see if these new behaviors are showing up naturally and not just in a structured setting.
Yeah.
And then it would show. I don't know if that made sense, but I hope we answered your question. All right. If decreasing stereotypy is not important to a parent, but you see it as socially stigmatizing, how do you compromise or discuss this as a goal?
I guess I would think about, why do you see it as socially stigmatizing? What has happened that made you makes you say that? If you're talking about a client who is maybe in a less restrictive environment or at work, I would speak to examples. If parents say like, oh, well, it's not bothering anyone, I would be honest. And rather than like, well, I see it as socially stigmatizing, I would say like, actually when they were in the gym and the teacher was giving instructions, everyone stopped paying attention to the teacher and was looking at your child. And what that caused was, and talk through objectively what happened. Leave your opinion out of it. Draw on observations that you've made that are making you say it's socially stigmatizing.
Okay, thank you, Justine.
I love this next question about how do you approach the conversation? Is that the next one? How do you approach the conversation about teaching please, thank you with the child?
Mhm.
So I always think about manners as being secondary, because I always think about whether the manner, the please, thank you is present or not. Um, what is being asked for is the thing that needs to be focused on, right? So like, stop touching me in a safety situation. Doesn't matter if please or thank you is present or not, right? That's an add-on. That's like an addition. And so if there's limited verbal communication, the request itself is what the focus should be. Once that's mastered in a variety of settings, especially safety settings, then bringing in the please, thank you. If you are working with a client who has a little bit more language and maybe they are able to use successfully 1 to 3 to 5 word utterances, maybe you just build in please, thank you from the beginning if it's important to the family to use that. But with the clients that we work with limited verbal skills, I would really say like the mannerisms should be secondary, because whether they're present or not, it doesn't matter to what is trying to be communicated in safety situations.
Great. Thanks, Justine. Do you want to pick the next one?
Yeah. I'm just reading through this. What to do when parents have very high expectations and what their child should be working on. Very high expectations with their child, but as a BCBA, I do not think they want to work on as appropriate. Well, I think relying on the data and foundational skills in conversations like this can be really helpful. I guess it depends on what they want to be worked on. Maybe bring it back to like, those are really good long-term goals. To get there, here's what needs to be worked on first. It's not always necessary. And Kristen, I don't know if you want to jump in, but like, I have found in my experience, like a younger Justine in my early BCBA days might have said like, well, we have to tell them like, this is not appropriate. And it's not appropriate to be working on right now. And with years of experience, I've learned like saying things like that aren't necessarily important. You don't have to say that. You can say it. You don't have to bust a bubble all the time, right? You can say like, those are really good long-term goals. Here are all the things that need to happen first, and bring the conversation back to what should be focused on now. And then sometimes in just hearing that, parents are like, oh, maybe I need to reestablish my expectations a little bit. Like there are other ways you can say the thing without actually saying it.
Right.
So
Totally.
I don't know.
And I like, because Justine always advocates for ask questions, and when in doubt, just ask open-ended questions. So I learned that from Justine. I actually have a question that I think is worth going over. How do you teach compliance when the student resists hand over hand prompting? I think that kind of went in with the whole prompting. Is it effective, efficient?
How do you teach compliance when the student resists hand over hand prompting? Well, I think I'm thinking that goes back to the compliance training piece, that I guess they're two separate issues, right? One is compliance and the other is trying to teach a skill. I think the section related to prompting is like, once you are teaching a skill where assent has occurred, to have the student engage in a response necessary for skill acquisition using physical prompting, assuming that in these situations assent is occurring.
Right. I think if we don't have assent, then we need to find ways to build motivation, so that we're not using hand over hand prompting for a child who's resisting. It seems like that we have to like go back 2 steps and find out how to reduce the resisting and increase motivation. Do you want to pick another one? We have like 3 minutes.
currently assuming compliance during self-care routines is appropriate. Compliance during self-care routines, and what recommendations do you have to avoid compliance in this scenario? I think like Kristen, what you just said, like go back to motivation and looking at, you know, if there is resistance in some way related to self-care routines, there are steps. It sounds like steps need to be, you need to do some backpedaling, and think about why is this happening? What is causing the non-compliance in some way? And ask those questions. Maybe it's related to toleration. And so a skill needs to be taught before working on the self-care routine, a skill related to toleration. I don't know. I'm just assuming, but
yeah, I've had a lot of, actually this year, I don't know, I had a lot of kids with difficulty toothbrushing, even tolerating wearing shorts. I've had quite a few clients who would not wear shorts without a diaper and just would not tolerate clothing and underwear, and would not, again, a lot with the toothbrushing. And so we really took it back to a place where the child would tolerate it. So for one kid, I was having the therapist put the shorts just on his lap and see if he would tolerate that skin to skin, that cotton to skin contact. And he did accept the shorts on his lap. And then we put the shorts over 1 foot, and that seemed to be a very difficult. So we only did it for half a second, and then we took it off and we celebrated. And then we did it for like 1 or 2 seconds, and then we took it off the foot and celebrated. And in about 2 months, or maybe even up close to 3, he's been wearing his shorts all day long and is fine. But it took 3 months of little tiny baby steps to get this kid to wear his shorts. And you just got to start where they're at. Same thing with toothbrushing. If they're not tolerating the toothbrush, skip the toothpaste, or don't do it in the bathroom, do it somewhere fun, in a playroom or something else that doesn't associate with that task. But find a way that you're going to get toleration and buy-in from the client.
Agreed.
Sorry, I just jumped in there because
Great.
we worked together, so I just had to. And I guess that's it. It's 8:30. I have put the survey in the webinar chat, so please click on that and make sure you're filling out the survey. We're going to start rolling out those certificates